And so let's take a moment to set our motivation for being together today. And even though we've started the beginning of an extremely busy, joyful time of the year with the holidays upon us quickly, it sometimes seems a little bit counterintuitive when we consider that Mother Earth is going into, in our part of the world, going into darkness, going into winter, kind of a time where the darkness and the cold almost beckon living creatures and living beings to go inward. The earth is sleeping, the animals are quiet, have migrated away or have found themselves snuggled in for the winter's long journey of quiet. But human beings have this thing about celebrating holidays, a time of light for many spiritual traditions, light coming out of the darkness. And so today, as we are together, let's take the light of this spiritual time in the world and that gentle invitation to go inward. And let's see if we can integrate them both in our sharing today, to be able to brighten the virtue and all the good things of the world, and in particular to hone in on and to take this time of the year to cultivate our own good qualities more inwardly in order to be able to express them in the world in order to be of the greatest benefit. So without that appearing to be too contradictory, let's really share the Dharma together with our hearts wide open, quietly reflecting on a very, very special day on a lot of different levels, to be able to grow our good qualities to their fullest potential in order to be of the greatest benefit for all beings. So today is a special day at the Abbey for a few reasons. First, it is indeed the last Sharing the Dharma Day for 2017. And this year we have begun this beautiful, beautiful book called An Open-Hearted Life by Venerable Tipton Chödrön and Russell Cultz, all about transformative methods for compassionate living. I'm not quite sure. We started somewhere about, I think, halfway through the beginning of the year. We had just finished another book, a lovely manual for compassionate life. So we'll have some of that in the sharing today. That's one of the first reasons why we're having our day today. The second one is that we are celebrating in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition one of its bright lights who brought great peace, harmony, compassion, wisdom to the world. His name is Lama Tsongkhapa, with his little gold panted hat over here. This is his statue that we were given many, many years ago when Venerable first found the Abbey. He lived in the mid-1300s to the early 1400s. And he was quite remarkable. I think His Holiness on some level, very, very similar in that he was a great teacher. He was a great author, great meditator, great debater, great scholar. And he also revived and strengthened the monastic tradition in Tibet. And he was just a mover and a shaker. And so one of his great writings was called the Lamrim Chenmo, which was the only text that His Holiness was able to smuggle out of Tibet the night that he escaped over the Himalayas. He took those volumes with him. And it is basically the entire Buddhist path from the beginning to the very end, from how to clean your room and set up your altar, all the way up to the special insight meditations for realizing the ultimate nature directly. Everything is lined out, a very precise, logical building block, interwoven, integrated in the Lamrim Chenmo. And one of his many, many writings, just a small part of his incredible gift as an author. And so today we commemorate his life and his gift of the pure Dharma, as well as this infinite love, compassion, and wisdom that he was willing to really go through a lot of hardship and to teach from a very, very young age until almost the day that he breathed his last breath. And for the Tibetan community, this includes a candle lighting and a rejoicing. So that's how we've integrated that also as part of our celebration today. And then the third event we wanted to commemorate was the 5th anniversary of the Sandy Hook tragedy on December 14th on 2012, where we lost 20 children and 6 teachers. We lost Adam Lanza, the shooter, as well as his mom. And so today we wanted to make a safe space for all of us to remember that and to speak from a place of connection, from healing, and maybe hope as a community of friends, not just for Sandy Hook, but this continual occurrences of violence in our country that seem to be continuing to play themselves out, to be able to find a tender place to connect about how we feel about that, how we can somehow engage that in a new way, and how we can move forward with a kind of joy and hope. So this morning I wanted to share a few thoughts about our commemoration today with the wish to help us all connect to the heart of compassion inside of each of us. And to really remember that no matter what's going on in our world, the only wise response is compassion. And that the spiritual work for each of us is to grow the conviction in our own minds from our own experience that that is indeed the only recourse we have. And until we are convinced in our own hearts that compassion is the sanest and wise answer to the world's pain, we will not be part of the solution. All right, so we're going to really talk a little bit more about how we can cultivate this compassion. For me, I feel there's a sense of urgency about really getting more serious about cultivating this very, very powerful state of mind. So when we think of compassion, it usually elicits a lot of these very, very powerful images, sometimes of mothers and their children, sometimes pictures of His Holiness when He's interacting with just about anybody. You can just feel that compassion just permeating from His core. Mother Teresa, Doctors Without Borders. I mean, there's a lot of images that we have had in our world that really elicit this kind of deep gratitude that we have these beings in this world that have this compassion so realized in their minds. But at the same time, our compassion sometimes calls out these very disturbing images that arise or that we see that give us a sense more of overwhelm, of feeling helpless, or going along with some actions that we don't agree with. So compassion, at least that's what we're feeling, this connecting to the suffering, but sometimes instead of feeling inspired or empowered, we feel quite overwhelmed. So it takes some deep contemplation on really trying to deeply understand what true compassion means or feels in the minds, and how do we dispel any of our fears and any of our misconceptions about what it is. Now in chapter 5, which is the chapter that that is going to be part of the talk today, abandoning misconceptions and making peace with our fears. Because some of the major misconceptions that we have about compassion is that if we become compassionate, we're going to become doormats for the world, that people are going to roll all over us, walk all over us, we're going to let them do whatever they want. And that we can't be strong and can't be compassionate at the same time, that somehow those are diametrically opposed in our minds. That we cannot give something strong and true in ourselves to really let that out when we're being compassionate at the same time. Or we have this misunderstanding that compassion has something to do with pity. It's got a little bit of a condescending flavor to it, that we look down on those that are less fortunate than us, those that are suffering. We're going to do them somehow a favor out of our deep compassionate altruism to give them a hand. So in this book, Open-Hearted Life, in the very beginning of the chapter, Venerable and Russell would say, let's get clear about what compassion is, what it is and what it isn't. Because being a doormat and not being strong and letting people walk all over us or having this kind of condescending pity are the incorrect misconceptions about what compassion really informs, what it really calls out of us to be. So and I find this to be one of the most clear definitions about compassion that I've ever heard about. It's very concise, very powerful, and very direct. It has two components: a sensitivity to suffering, that's the first component, and then the intention to alleviate it. So the first one involves being open and willing to be moved in our hearts in the face of pain or suffering, to allow ourselves to bear witness to the difficulties that we ourselves experience as well as others, and to be touched by that. This is a very internal process, to be able to look pain and suffering right in the face, to witness it, keep our hearts open, and to be willing to be touched by it, even deeply. Then the experience of being moved at this level by the suffering of ourselves and the world. Then the second part, the second component arises, which is the intention to help, to make things better for others, whatever our capacity. All right, so there's a lot of wisdom involved in compassion too. There's how do I respond, how do I engage, and what is my capacity to do so. So in thinking about compassion, I've thought about it a lot this year. It keeps coming up in my practice. It keeps coming up in things that I'm invited to share. And there are a number of threads of thought that I have found in my practice when woven together with my wish to cultivate compassion. They seem to sort of strengthen it, sort of stabilize it, maybe make it a little bit more resilient. So I wanted to share those three particular threads that I have sort of integrated into my practice on compassion. The first one is founded on a premise that generally believes that all living beings, without exception, human and non-human, have an innate right to be happy and to not suffer simply because they exist. His Holiness has said this probably who knows how many thousands of times, and the more you listen to him say that over the years, the profundity of this statement: there is an innate right of every living, breathing being on this planet to have happiness and the causes for it, and to be free of suffering and the causes of that. And that we're just like all living beings because we want exactly the same thing. So that's the first thread. When you put it through compassion, it makes it strong because there's nothing different about us in this fundamental wish. The second thread that weaves through compassion is there is no one who does not experience pain or hardship, unhappiness, no matter, healthy, good-looking, wealthy, loved, talented, comfortable. Each of us has to deal with challenges and misfortune in our lives, including the three that are totally inescapable: aging, sickness, and death, across the board, across species, across time, across longevity, aging, sickness, and death. We will lose or be separated from our dear ones, the things we treasure. We will do our very best and not succeed. Our dreams will not be fulfilled no matter how hard we try to achieve them. And we will get a lot of things in our life that we don't want. We feel all sorts of intense feelings in the face of living life and being human. We are all in this together. So I have found by thinking about this that there is no living being that does not experience some form of unhappiness or suffering. That I find it to be a very befriending, connecting thought. Because sometimes when I'm in the middle of some really difficult times in my mind, it can get really lonely. You know, loneliness is sometimes one of these things that sneaks in, that I'm alone in this experience. I'm alone in having this suffering or this unhappiness. But to connect and say there isn't any living being, including right now, as I'm experiencing this unhappiness, that there are limitless beings going through somewhat their similar version of unhappiness or suffering. And to use this as a connecting, befriending, tying, interweaving thought to grow compassion. And then the third one is that we're part of an interconnected tapestry. I mean, there is nothing we own, nothing we use, nothing we know, any talents, skills we have that are not due to the kindness and the efforts and the willingness of another being to give that to us. Our requisites to start off with: our food, our clothing, our shelter, our medicine. I mean, when we think about it, where would we be without each other? I mean, that's kind of a silly question. There's no place. We would not be alive if it weren't for each other. So we see suffering, we remember that each of us are part of an interconnected tapestry, and that what affects one of us affects all of us. So this is the third thread that I kind of weave through my meditation on compassion. It makes it strong, makes me feel connected to living beings, and gives me some strength, some determination to really cultivate the ability and the strength to be able to look at suffering directly and want to alleviate it. And that many of the spiritual traditions, although sometimes these days it doesn't seem to be very self-evident, is that they really assert, as well as the Buddhism does, that compassion is the only wise, appropriate response to any kind of suffering and pain in the world. Across the board, most of the spiritual traditions, when you get down to the essence of things, that is their fundamental assertion. Of course, this is not the initial response when we see difficulties. I mean, we get angry, we blame, we get scared, we distract ourselves, we run away. But if we think about it, for all the times that we've done all of those things, how many times have all of those things besides compassion either lessened the suffering, much less eliminated it? Success rate, maybe temporarily for a while. But sooner or later, it arises again because the mind is not strong enough to deal with the inevitable sufferings of life. And that compassion is a radical response because it turns us right into the pain. We don't avoid it. We don't deny it. We don't blame someone. We don't blame something for it. We turn right into the pain. We move our hearts and minds towards that direction. And then we put ourselves in a position to actually look at it and see what it is that we can do. And we do that with wisdom. What's our capacity? What's our time? What's our resources? How far away are we? We may not be able to do anything. But to have that deep wish, may they be well, may they be free of the suffering and all the causes for it. Because we have to understand that compassion is an internal attitude. It's a personal experience of the heart. It's self-generated, extremely personal, and it's something that we ourselves alone can cultivate. There is no way that we can actually help everyone. There is no way to alleviate the suffering of the world. If that could have been possible, the Buddhas would have done it eons ago. But to have a mind and a heart that sees the pain and cares and seeks to help, no matter whether it's a little bit or none at all or greatly. But it's the mind that wishes to be able to do that. And so we have to understand that this is an internal cultivation, an internal mind transformation, this mind of compassion. So today, as we commemorate the 5th anniversary of Sandy Hook, just get some water here. Okay. This is the test. This tragedy is to look at this young man, Adam Lance, who was really confused and suffering deeply, and in the end he took his own life. I think for us as a community, not just the Abbey community, but our extended community, we must return over and over again to what compassion really is, and to our own true nature, which is goodness and kindness. We have to understand that the innate quality of the human heart is kindness and goodness. And by understanding that, when these tragedies unfold, we respond by turning to them straight on to witness them, to be moved by them, and then to call up this wish to alleviate the suffering. And that may require that we stand up and say, this is unacceptable. We will not agree to this. We will not condone this. We will not pretend that it didn't happen. We will not minimize this. Compassion does not shy away from pain and suffering. Because it is the wish to care for and protect each other and to alleviate suffering. That is the part of our nature. So compassion does not run away, does not run and hide, does not minimize, stands up very clearly, very strongly. And this is our practice, to think deeply about compassion, to test its truth in our own world, right in our backyard, right in underneath our own roofs, to believe that if indeed this is true, that compassion is our fundamental quality of mind, and that we can live from that more and more each day. And that we have to practice to the point that we actually believe that, not that it's just some sort of intellectual understanding. There is I inserted right here, there's a 37-second video that's out right now. It's probably gone viral. And this, I think, is the absolute natural response of the human heart. Somebody with an iPhone is in the middle of the forest fire in California. It's at night. And they're videotaping a young man. He's wearing flip-flops, shorts, and a T-shirt. And he's running back and forth in the dark along the highway. The whole background behind him is ablaze. And there's a little wild rabbit that is running along the road, and he's trying to catch it, and it runs into the fire. And he's standing there, and the video is catching him going like this, just going left, back and forth, and he turns around, and he bends down, and he's going like this. And that little rabbit comes out of this flaming bush, and he captures that little wild hare. And the video ends with him walking down in this fiery night, ablaze all around him with this little rabbit held in his chest, which he took to the wildlife center. She had burns, she had smoke inhalation. They don't know whether she'll survive or not, but she's alive right now. To see this, and you look at this, he's 21 years old, some young man. This is the natural response of the human heart. And this plays itself over again millions, millions, and millions of times a day. And we're going to find out why we don't remember that. Okay? In contrast, some people believe that human beings are malevolent by nature. Okay, so we have to guard ourselves from each other. And when you think about all the systems of self-protection we have in our world, okay, we've got security systems, we've got padlocks, we've got prisons, we've got firewalls, we've got antivirus software, we've got passwords, guard dogs, lawsuits, all the way up to the ultimate best way to protect ourselves, guns. All in response to the false notion that we all have at some degree, and that's part of spiritual practice, to see what degree we have this false notion that the enemy is out there and we need to protect ourselves. And we do this sometimes almost unconsciously by putting people in groups according to their color, their social standing, their gender, their sexual identity, their economics, their ethnicity, their religion, political views. We put each other into these othering boxes. Othering. Us, other. So that anyone who is not exactly like us warrants suspicion and self-protection from our side. I mean, is this what we really want? Do we really want to other ourselves to death? I don't think so. So in one of the chapters, Geshe Zopa, one of Venerable's teachers, does a commentary on Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo. And one of the chapters, he asks us, when we think of those who harm, kill, and cause chaos, do we think they are in their right minds? Do we think they have any control over their minds to do the horrible things that they did? Is that possible to begin with? Is it possible for a reasonable person to go out and commit such horrible acts of violence? It's not. Geshe Zopa says these people are under the control of serious mental afflictions and they're out of their minds. It's a deeply suffering being, totally out of their minds. They are victims of their own deluded thinking that drove them to moments of insanity in a tragic search for that innate right? The search for happiness and to avoid suffering. Under this delusioned, insane mind, for however long moments that took, to try to find happiness or to put at bay some deep, horrible demon inside. And when we can look at these perpetrators, to say very clearly regarding these tragedies, there are victims all around. There's no victim, there's no perpetrator. They are all victims. This is not to say that we condone their actions, but to see these folks through a very, very different lens. They are sentient beings in so much pain to do this. All right, sentient beings suffering, tragic, confused effort to find happiness or to run away from some great demon, and the action they did. They must be held responsible for the action they did, but to hate the person in pain who committed the action, seeing them as inherently evil, is to see them without any compassion whatsoever. So we have to separate the action from the suffering being. And it's frightening to see how guns are bringing a new level of violence in our country, that sometimes we feel hopeless to do anything about it. But to be able to see that by turning our minds to compassion, even in small ways, thinking about the agony, thinking about the confusion, think about the fear, the rage consuming these minds who act violently, can make a difference in the way that we see them. The world, as disturbing as it is, may present us with some possibilities. That these occurrences are not causeless. They occur within a system of causes and conditions. And although we can't change what brought the person to do such extreme wild behavior, there are many causes and conditions. We certainly can't see them. They may not even know what they were. No one knows. Ones that we have no control over, especially somebody else's mind. We have enough hard time trying to find control, ability to be with and take care of our own minds. But there are causes and conditions that we can influence. And with compassion, not anger, we commit ourselves to working for those changes that will affect the outcome of a great number of things. And that we find as we really look at these situations, these tragedies, what's going on, not just in this country, around the world, with this bigger perspective about the suffering minds, the actions separate from the suffering being, that we start seeing there's all these people around us who have the same unsettledness, that want to do something about this. And before you know it, the wave, the force of goodness starts to really connect with itself. And the bigger that wave, the bigger that tapestry of compassion, the more positive effect that change will bring. And it certainly would ease our own discomfort, both individually and collectively, far better than being overwhelmed or unhappy or avoiding issues. It's a very transformative, radical way to think, a little bit against the grain on how we normally think about folks who do such violent things. And so I wanted to share with you two extraordinary human beings who think just like this. They have compassion in their minds, and when they look at sentient beings, no matter who they are, they have this incredible feeling of wishing to be of benefit. So in this beautiful book, which should be on everybody's Christmas list, it's called The Book of Joy by His Holiness and Desmond Tutu. Desmond Tutu says, people are basically good. That's where we have to start. Everything else is an aberration. We've got to recognize that despite the aberration, the fundamental thing about humanity, about humankind, about people, is that they are good, made good, and that they really want to be good. Yes, there are many, many things that depress us, but there are very many things that are fantastic about our world. And here's the piece that I wanted to talk about when I mentioned that video about that little bunny rabbit and that young man, that plays itself out over and over again, is that Archbishop Tutu and His Holiness say that unfortunately the media does not report on these incredible, fantastic things. Why? Because they are normal. The innate goodness of the human heart plays itself out billions and billions of times through the day. But because the bad things happen, we become so fascinated by them because they are unusual. They are not the norm. The usual truth is that millions and millions of children are loved by their parents every day. They go to school, are cared for and taught by millions and millions of teachers. There's immense health care for millions and millions of people. Every nanosecond of the day, human beings are caring, protecting, nourishing, supporting each other. But it's so common that it doesn't become news. We take it for granted. This is just the way we are. It's the wild stuff, the aberrations, that we're absolutely horrifiedly fascinated with because it's so anomaly of our basic good nature. So His Holiness says, when we look at the news as terrible, we need to cultivate a broader, wider lens to look through. And one of the qualities of mind, there's some beautiful, they're called the 8 pillars of joy. And the first one is generating what is called a perspective. Perspective is an inner quality of mind that they say is, from the get-go, is important to have. And what His Holiness says is that since we create most of our own suffering, okay, there is a really good thing to sit and digest, that humanity creates a lot of its own problems. He says it makes sense that we should be able to create our own joy. And the key, he explains, is our perspective and the thoughts and feelings and actions that come as a result. It's our ability to reframe. All right, here's another word that I keep saying coming up. Another powerful tool for our minds, to reframe the situation in a more positive way. And if there's anything that you take home today, this is the one sentence I want you to really take home. That this ability to have this huge perspective to reframe whatever situation, no matter how horrific, to be able to reframe it in a wider view. Both these two spiritual leaders, as well as a whole bunch of psychological researchers, are showing here, the way we see the world is the way we experience the world. And changing the way we see the world changes the way we feel and act, which changes the world itself. All right? This is the fundamental teaching of the Buddha. Our minds create our own experience. And there's a beautiful, powerful quote from Viktor Frankl, who was the great Jewish author that survived Auschwitz, who concluded, after coming out of that situation, our perspective towards life is our final and ultimate freedom. Now, of course, there's going to be some skeptics in the group here, including me. This is not Pollyanna or magical thinking. This is viewing the world through a much bigger lens, and His Holiness says we need to look at it from at least 6 sides. Front, back, left side, right side, below, above. Throw in close up, far away. And he says we do this because then we're going to have a much more holistic, much more complete view of what's actually going on. This increases our level of understanding reality. And then we can respond more wisely and constructively and creatively. But the beauty of this wider perspective is that it denies nothing about the reality of the situation. It doesn't deny Sandy Hook. It doesn't deny Las Vegas. It doesn't deny Sutherland, Texas. But it simply is putting it in a proper place in reality. And I would have to say that this is coming from 2 spiritual leaders who have seen genocide of their people through apartheid and invasion. And despite that, you will not see 2 more joyful people anywhere in the world. I mean, this book radiates joy. When you read the chapters, you can feel the joy coming out of this book. They know something. And it would behoove us, as part of the human family, to pay very close attention to what they have to say. They know. All right? We want to have a society where everybody gets care and help regardless of what you look like, who you are. And we know that compassion, this mind that was just defined, is not a mind that just sits there and does nothing. His Holiness Desmond Tutu, example A, example B. It's a very powerful, precise, and courageous mind that can engage and be effective using this much larger perspective and framing as a tool. So then we get down to the kind of the practicalities here. We kind of know some of the things that we need to address in our country. We need to address and increase the expenditure for mental health, to care for the mentally ill, make it so they feel safe rather than stigmatized, for their families to feel supported and protected. We need to make sure that people who have committed acts of violence against their loved ones don't have access to guns. We need to kind of keep track, like we keep track of when we buy a home, a car, register to vote, run a business, borrow money. All of our personal stuff is tracked. Anybody who owns a gun, put it out there. You need to be tracked. We need to just kind of make sure you're doing okay. There's rules, there's guidelines. And we need to be clear and loud and consistent with these pronouncements. We need to outlaw certain kinds of guns that make killing very easy. And we can do this, and the wisdom and compassion piece is that this takes small increments of progress. This is not irrational. This is not unreasonable. We keep putting the message out that this is for everyone's safety and well-being. And that's what we have to continue to do. We're changing our own mind, first of all. The othering has got to go. The exclusivity's got to go. Making enemies of the world has got to go from the inside out. But affecting change little by little from the inside out is going to produce more and more changes in a positive way. This fundamental goodness that is holiness and Desmond Tutu talk about across the board, our interdependence is a stark contrast to the othering of each other. And another word that is really coming up too is this sense of belongingness. And what's very heartening is that, there's a lot of the great spiritual leaders, these very wise people that say that despite the dispiriting events of the world, they truly believe that humanity has made tremendous progress towards tolerance, inclusion, and equality. That despite and the fact that we live in a great time of great social upheaval and change can really precipitate and increase the tolerance, the equality, the compassion. But whether we continue to march towards this more inclusive society while still at times steadying our own fears pretty much depends on us. So there's this beautiful term called the circle of human concern, which is not just tolerating and respecting differences, but to ensure that all people are welcome and feel that they belong in society. It involves humanizing the other. And once again, this starts from our own inner work, where any negative representations, stereotypes, biases that we have about other beings are challenged and rejected. And if we're going to weave this belongingness into our tapestry of compassion, it has to include these unhappy, confused, and angry ones that are killing large amounts of people. We cannot shut them out of our minds if we're going to cultivate compassion for the world. And it is the process by which these most marginalized outgroups are brought into the center of our concern through what Dr. King envisioned the beloved community. So to end this, I have a whole other things I want to say, but we're running out of time. Here's a wonderful concept. And this came from a most interesting article about othering. We examine how promoting belonging through this very wide, compassionate perspective must begin by expanding the circle of human concern. Belonging is the most important good we distribute in society. We see it as something we actually give. I don't want to put commodity on it, but it's distributed amongst all of the human family in our country, in society, this sense of belonging as a good. As it is prior to and informs all other distributive decisions on who gets what and how much. If our country had this as a paradigm, starting with us, that goodness, belonging, were the priority to distribute equally among all residents and citizens of this country, before we decide who gets what, who gets how much, everybody is on an equal level par, irregardless of who they are and what they think. We support the creation of structures of inclusion that recognize and accommodate differences rather than seek to erase it. So this is all about, an internal transformation that eventually will reflect in an external structure. And we see this happening. Once again, there's a whole bunch of wonderful things going on in the world. We just don't hear about them because they're normal. And that this kind of mind transformation is probably one of the most compassionate of all the kind of mind transformations, is this sense of belonging, the sense of inclusion with compassion as the guide. So today in our tender place here, we have many perspectives to look at. Each one of us has a different perspective about how we see the world. To expand them, to connect them, to share them. And that our perspectives together will affect change because we are changing. And as we change, so does the world. We have to remember that one saying. Let me go back to it so we understand and take this home with us. That the way we see the world is the way we experience the world. And changing the way we see the world changes the way we feel and act, which changes the world itself. Right? So if there's anything that I can send home with you, it would be that quote. And that being here together in this very tender space is a wonderful opportunity to open up our perspective on how we see the world in order to be of the greatest benefit. So anyway, that is my sharing for today. And I'm not sure what time we end. I have some moments of comments, or we can wait until after lunch. It's 12:47. People have a comment they would like to spontaneously share. We're going to have plenty of time this afternoon to touch that place. But anybody have something that's just wanting to? Catherine?
I have a calligraphy done by Thich Nhat Hanh in his own hand that says, "Peace in oneself, peace in the world."
That kind of sums it up. Yeah. Another wise being of compassion. All right. Well, then let's just take a few minutes to do a little bit of digestion meditation. There's a lot in there. Inclusion, compassion, seeing suffering beings as out of their minds, wishing them well. Using our open-heartedness to the creating peace in a chaotic world.